Good morning. All right.
Page 2, second slide.
Well, I've got 9:30, and I'll call this meeting to order. Morning, Ken. Morning, Sean. Morning, everybody. Already said good morning to almost everybody here. Morning, Matt. If you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, we'll get this meeting going. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, I don't see any new guests here, so we'll just keep moving right along. And I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll move to approve the agenda.
I'll second it.
Okay, there's been a motion to approve the agenda by Ms. Henderson and a second by Mr. Allen. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's approved unanimously. We'll go right on to our workshop items, starting with item number 1, discussion of possible action reinstating Route 412 and establishing a fare collection policy for Route 412 effective June 20th, 2016. And before we start with the presentation on this, I'm going to ask the board to please hold their questions until after the presentation for the first segment of the 412, and then we go on to the 411 W&C. That'll allow the staff time to keep the continuity of this going, so hold those questions until we get to the end of the 412, and we will answer the questions at that point. So, Ken, are you starting this presentation or passing it
Sure.
along?
I'll do a little introduction here and then pass it on to Paul. This presentation is a culmination of efforts that staff has undertaken over the past 9 months, I guess, beginning with the peer task group that we had the late summer of last year, the State Association, Whidbey peer group. We worked through that and worked during the months back and forth internally and with the board on various alternatives and various concepts on both the 412 and then the fare issue with our inter-county routes. At the last board meeting in particular, there were some questions and concerns relative to particular items which were not included in that last presentation, and I think perhaps some of those issues were, there was some confusion in terms of maybe the items weren't included or they were missed, or that staff did not take into account certain things that the board was interested in seeing. So this presentation hopefully is taking into account all the board's questions and concerns, or at least hopefully the majority of them. And to make it easier and simpler as far as understanding and being able to methodically review what's before us, we've broken it into the 2 routes, 411 and 412. That's what the issues come down to, is implementation of Route 412, and then also the fare issue related to inter-county service, which is 412 and 411 W&C. So this presentation is broken down. First of all, discussion of Route 412, the route and the fare structure, and then we'll move on to 411 WC, which does not include any revision to the route itself, but discussion of possible future fares. So with that, we'll get started. Okay, up for discussion and action, 411 and 412 fare policy. As I mentioned, we're taking the 412 issue first. We're going to discuss that first. Route 412 Everett connector, as we all know, was mandated, fares were mandated as a condition of receiving funds for that route. Also included in the mandate was an 8% fare box recovery ratio. 412 was to operate strictly between Camano and Everett Station as a commuter service. We know through our surveys and public meetings, and we feel comfortable that we've been able to determine this, that about 80% of the riders on that service would be commuters. The other 20% made up of students or casual riders or riders with medical needs and so forth, but primarily a commuter-based ridership. It resembles the Skagit Transit 90X route, which operates between Skagit Station and Everett Station. And we bring this up because it does appear that it is an overlapping service, but it isn't. It does travel the same route from the Stanwood Park and Ride on I-5 into Everett Station as the 412 would, but that service currently is at capacity for Skagit Transit. So if we were to somehow coordinate or utilize the services of Skagit Transit, there would need to be an additional vehicle added to at least one additional vehicle added to that route because of ridership demand. That's an informational item. Route 411WC, the Tri-County connector. There is no legislative mandate associated with this service as far as fares or fare box recovery goes. 411 routes link riders to Skagit County transfer points, which are included at Marsh's Point and at Skagit Station. This has a more diverse ridership than projected on the 412. We know again from the public meetings and from surveys that the ridership is about 60% of workers who commute into Mount Vernon area or Skagit County, with a larger diverse ridership of 40%, which are leisure riders, students, riders going to Mount Vernon for shopping, medical trips, and so on. So 411 generally has a lower commuter ridership percentage. 411W requires a connection with Skagit Transit's 40X for transfers to Mount Vernon at Marsh's Point. So that's another important consideration in looking at fares for 411. I'll turn it over to Paul.
So first we're going to talk about Route 411, Everett connector. There's two decision points that need to be made today or at some point. Approving proposed 412 service and determine a 412 fare. So as Ken was mentioning, we've been working on fare implementation and the planning for that for quite some time here. This shows our original implementation timeline starting in January. There was extensive planning. We conducted public meetings, writing surveys, and we acquired some fare equipment. Some of the phases that would still need to be implemented would be installing fare equipment, implementing cash handling procedures, hiring, training some additional staff, and then public awareness and public meetings to let people know what our timeline would look like. So far, one thing we should note is a delay in our fare decision has resulted in a 2-week delay in fare implementation. So we're now currently looking at implementation date of June 20th. In order to examine this problem, we felt that we needed to look at a number of different points, and it's called meeting stakeholders' interests. There are a lot of diverging interests here with 412. First and foremost, understanding the target market, defining a route that's accessible for riders, creating services that don't overlap with other agencies, coordinating the link with neighboring transit agencies, be consistent with the neighboring agency fare rates, set a fare rate that's attractive to riders, and of course meet our 8% cost recovery mandated by the state. First off, we want to target our Camano commuters. Our survey showed about 90% of the riders are non-elderly, non-youth, and non-student riders. And so we drew an assumption that if 10% were Medicaid and disabled riders, then we would be left with about 80% riders who could pay a fare, a full fare. And we would be able to reach approximately a 7% recovery ratio with only those commuters. We're calling them commuters. Our proposed service looks like this on the map. We're going from North Camano Island down to Everett Station with various stops. It should be noted that the vast majority of this route, 31 approximate miles, is what we would call a commuter pickup type range area, and then the remaining 2.5 miles are downtown stops. Commuter service is defined as having closed door service for within that stretch for 5 miles, continuous miles, anywhere within that stretch. And 412 fits that definition to be a commuter route. And one other thing that I should mention here is that this service is a reinstalling of our previous service that we ran in 13-14. So all these stops are the same as what we left when the service was discontinued. Another thing we want to do is avoid overlapping service. Other agencies run similar routes, but the transits don't directly serve Camano Island commuters, and the scheduled community buses are full at full capacity. So those agencies would have to add buses if they were going to run the service. We want to coordinate with other agencies to provide regional connections. Island Transit would connect passengers with Community, Sound, and Everett Transits at Everett Station. And Everett Transit would provide us with a bus bay for Island Transit scheduled times. We want to set a fare that's consistent with similar routes in other transit districts. So you can see across the board the various fare rates for similar routes, and the average, the other transit fares in our region, the average is about $2. If we were to offer discounted fare, we would need to come up with some sort of proof of eligibility for what we call bus-dependent riders. With respect to our tight timeline of implementing 412, we're just proposing that we would use identification cards that riders already possess for proof of discount eligibility. Of course, there are other options, but we're just putting this one out there. Examples might be their driver's license, student ID, Medicaid card, disabled ID, or even an Island Transit paratransit ID. So it comes to a head here, the options for perhaps that we're going to put forward towards setting a fare. Option 1 would be $2 a ride without any discounts for any riders. Or option 2 would be $2 per ride with $1 discounted fare per ride for those considered discounted type riders. Under option 1, our cost per mile, so we're looking at seeing how economical it is for riders. Will they continue to ride? And so we draw some assumptions. The first one is price of fuel, $3 a gallon, assuming car travels 23 miles a gallon, and assuming a fare rate of $2 per ride or $4 round trip. The 412 passenger would pay 6 cents a mile to make this ride. If they were just paying for fuel, it would cost them 13 cents a mile. And a couple other rates were put out there: IRS medical reimbursement rate 19 cents a mile, or the business reimbursement rate of 54 cents a mile as a comparison. So it's still a good deal for riders. It's economical. First year startup costs. So we went and determined what it would cost us to get this going on in the Camano Island region, and we came up with a total of around $15,000 for startup costs. Under option 1, do we meet the 8% cost recovery ratio? So if we're charging everyone $2, we looked at our estimated peak annual ridership for 4 runs, 4 most populated runs, and then we reduced that by 30% $2 per ride comes out to about $33.85. And if we look at that over our total cost for that service for 1 year, we have a 9.61 cost recovery ratio. That meets and exceeds the 8%. What is the financial impact to us? So we'd be seeking reimbursements for about $348,000, and then whatever fares we collect under the state rules when we're in a state contract situation is we would need to reduce our reimbursement by the fares collected, so they would really have no impact. And then we had our fare startup costs. So the net impact to Island Transit would be collecting $334,112. Option 2, fares with discounts. So if we were charging a $2 regular fare and a $1 discounted fare, we looked at a scheduled transit model for these categories, but of course that's open for discussion. Or discounted fares for over 65, youth, 8 to 18, college students, Medicaid recipients, and disabled, where children under 8 would ride free. So looking at our target demographic and seeing perhaps what they would be charged, we took some survey information where we identified over 65 youth and college students, and we're just estimating Medicaid recipients and disabled to come up with a regular paying fare of about 80%. They would be paying $2, and everyone else, all the discounted would be paying $1. So again, we're trying to decide, will it be economical for riders? Making the same assumptions about fuel and miles per gallon. Before we were paying at 6 cents a mile for regular riders. Discounted, of course, would be half of that, 3 cents a mile. And you can see how that compares still with just the price of gas or what the IRS says it costs to drive their vehicle. And it's still a good deal for the riders. First year startup costs, again, are the same for Camano Island. Do we meet the 8% cost recovery ratio? We look at the numbers, we still meet that percentage, 8.65%. What's the financial impact? Really no different than before, because any fares we collect will be reduce the amount of reimbursement we get from the state. So that comes to the summary of options for 412. We have option 1 and option 2. Under option 1, we have $2 fare, financial impact $334,112, cost recovery 9.61. Under option 2, discounted fares, financial impact's the same, cost recovery is less, but still exceeds that 8% mandated by the state. Which brings us full circle again, decisions at hand. Do we want to approve 412 service? And if so, determine a 412 fare rate.
Okay, down to the staff and director's recommendation on 412 service. The route configured for this service between Terry's Corner and Everett Station is similar to that of the route that was terminated in 2014. We're proposing 2 a.m. and 2 p.m. round trips to best serve commuter needs. And that has been discussed in the past as well, rather than the 3 trips, because we do have the additional funding from the $500,000 that has not been spent to date from the state. Fares, we're recommending a $2 cash only, one-way, all passenger, no reduced fare, no reduced fares for the reduced fare categories. $2 fare is consistent with commuter fares of neighboring agencies. It satisfies the mandated 8% fare box recovery ratio. Reduced fares not considered at this time in order to allow further study of reduced fare demographics, and also to forego the additional time it would take to correctly implement a reduced fare program, do it right. and also implementing a reduced fare program that would be good for other reduced fare categories or reduced fare routes in the future. We want to establish a model for success, something that we can show the legislature works and not provide impediments that might detract from the service or detract from its operational performance. We want to make sure we do this right the first time. Demonstrate to the legislature IT's commitment to fare collection on other routes in the future, showing that it does work for this route and that we can make it work for other additional routes in the future. That is the recommendation that I put before you for 412 at this point. Any questions?
Questions? Let's start, want to go ahead, Rick? We'll start at that end, we'll move to Jill, and then to Jackie, then Bruce,
Good.
and Lance. Question?
I have no questions. I'm waiting for other people's thoughts.
I understand the recommendations from the executive director, and I'm going to support the recommendations as they were presented.
Then I am going to also.
Bruce?
I have no questions either.
Lance?
I have no questions.
And I have no questions, but I have a comment to add to that recommendation, is that we take another look at this in January 2017 to consider possibly increasing that from $2 to $3. That is a long route that substantially benefits the Stanwood, Camano, Skagit, or not Skagit, excuse me, but the Snohomish community. And we don't have to deal with that now, but I like the idea of having the model. We are required to have something in place so that we can show to the legislature. And our fares for the future of the 412 is solely dependent on legislative funding. And we only have another year left on that. So I really like the idea of, on this early development time of this system, this fare system, to review it every 6 months. Because as we move forward, we may end up with an electronic system that is consistent with the adjoining agencies, and we may want to adjust our fee structure at that time. And if we make those decisions now in terms of policy, that will give us the flexibility in the future to adjust those fares. And a final comment here is that all of our fares are, even what we're putting in now, are substantially reduced because they are highly subsidized. Everybody is getting a break on the reduced fares as they're presented. That's all I have. Matt, do we?
Well,
Excuse me, go ahead.
now I'd like to comment.
Yeah, all right.
Okay. At this point, we're discussing the 412 and Ken's recommendation. I'm all for looking back and seeing how we're doing in 6 months, but as for setting a policy saying we're going to review fares every 6 months, I'm opposed to that. Secondly, I think before we look at even planning on raising the fare structure in January or even discussing it, I think it would be more advised that we plan on perhaps making a trip to Olympia in January and advocating for continued funding for this route, because regardless of the amount we pay for the fare, if we don't get continued support from the state, this route will probably go away. So I'm not for setting a policy for reviewing fares at this time. We're discussing the implementation of the 412 and the fare system.
If we set the fare or raise the fare to $3, as Rick's suggesting, what are the other agencies doing? Their minimum at $3, are they?
Grays Harbor was.
But that's not one of our agencies.
And I think we're premature to discuss that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman? If I could comment, in addition to the board's actions, that included with that or with this process will be our outreach, again, to public meetings, informing Camano riders of the board's intent, having at least two public meetings, if not three, and bringing those comments back to the board, and then having a formal fair policy adoption after we've gone through the public input process. So this action, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, is direction to the staff along this path.
Correct.
Ultimately, there'll be a fair policy resolution that will be presented.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So can I ask a clarification question? So I was going to make a motion similar to the one that was recommended, but to include the fair amount in there. Is that not appropriate?
You can say the direction will be the $2 fare without changes in the resolution.
Well, I'm prepared to make a motion for that at that point.
We're not at that point. I think there's further discussion. Lance?
I have nothing else.
Anything from you? The reason I'm not talking about the fare increase of $3, what I'm talking about in terms of the policy, since we're in the infancy of developing this system, shouldn't we have a policy to review it every 6 months as policy, not as necessarily a fare increase?
I think that's going to go without saying. When you start charging fare to the public, that you're always going to be devaluing fares,
Okay.
especially at the beginning.
All right, then let's
But
not complicate it.
it's very commonly done throughout the industry,
Okay.
every 6 months or so. Just to keep a handle on what the needs are for the future and keeping the financials in perspective.
All right, any further discussion? If there isn't, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to reinstate the 412 and to establish a $2 per rider rate each way with no discount and free to those 8 and under for the Route 412 effective June 20th, 2016. This is my motion, so it can get amended here. With a review of this at the time of route renewal by the legislature. So renew of this fare at the time of route renewal by the legislature.
Well, there's been a motion, and I'm going to try to restate the motion or repeat it. Motion by Ms. Johnson and a second by Ms. Henderson, and that's to reinstate the 412, establish a fare of $2 for the 412 effective June 20th with no reductions in fare except for those who are 8 years and younger. And help me out with the back part of that.
With a review of this fare at the time of route renewal by the legislature.
And review of this fare at the time of route review by the legislature.
Route renewal.
Renewal by the legislature. You have that, Meg? Okay. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll call for the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It carries unanimously. We have a 412 at $2, no fare reductions. We'll move on to the next agenda item.
We'll move on to the 411. I just want to point out this particular photograph. I don't know who took it or for what purpose, but I don't know if there's symbolism there between Skagit County and Island County, and somebody's in the clouds and somebody isn't. I guess it's Skagit if you're looking north.
There's 2 people on the bridge.
Well, they're looking for it.
Waiting for a bus.
All right, let's move this along. Next agenda item for this workshop. Item number 2, this is a discussion with possible action to establish a fare collection policy for Route 411W and the 411C. And so, Ken, if you're going to start this, or Paul, who is up?
Okay, so now we're discussing Route 411, Tri-County Connector, and here there's just one decision point in whether to charge a fare on 411W and C. two sides of it, Whidbey and Camano. Again, original implementation timeline, we're on the same basic timeline as with 412. Our delay in our decision put it back 2 weeks to June 20th. The service, like I was saying before, it's two components. We have 411W in the green and 411C in the yellow, and they have various stops which are listed to the right. Basically, our 411W is going from Oak Harbor to March's Point, connects up with the 40X with Skagit Transit, and the 411C starts at Terry's Corner and goes up to Mount Vernon, Skagit Station. Again, both qualify as commuter routes because there's closed-door service at some point on that route of at least 5 miles. Here we're, in order to look at this problem, again, we want to satisfy our stakeholder interests. Many of them are the same, understanding our marketplace and avoiding overlapping service, coordinating with other transit agencies, being consistent in the region with other fare rates, set a fare rate that's attractive to riders, that will accommodate those who are dependent and less able to pay, satisfy the state legislator, and finally, we want to satisfy our state legislators' concerns for future funding eligibility. Here the target market is a little bit different. From our survey, we saw that our regular riders would probably be in the range of about 60%. We were able to survey over 65 youth, 8 to 18, and college students, and we're drawing estimates or assumptions about who our Medicaid and disabled riders would be. But like I said, this is different from the 412 in that we estimate about 60% being regular riders, regular paid riders, or 40% discounted. We want to avoid overlapping service. There's no other public transit services provided in these regions that would be covered or that are covered currently by 411C and 411W. We want to coordinate and link with other agencies to provide regional connections. 411W connects passengers to transits, Skagit Transit's 40X at March's Point. 411C links passengers to other routes at Skagit Station. We saw this before. We want to set a fare that's consistent with similar routes. The average in the region is about $2. The unique thing about 411 is that whatever fare we charge, the fares double because they are going through Skagit Transit in order for riders to get to their destination. So it's not in Skagit Transit's best interest to do transfers. Since their portion of the route, for example, 40X, isn't funded by the state legislature. Thus, the fares collected or uncollected, that would be the transfers, are a loss to their operating income. So we've spoken to petition Skagit Transit a couple times in order to allow for a free transfer. The last time being April 5th, and their decision remains unchanged to allow free transfers at March's Point for Island County riders. 411W and 411C connect through Skagit Transit, so most riders will pay twice to connect to their final destination, thus doubling any fare that we charge. We want to accommodate transit-dependent riders, so our survey shows about 40% of our ridership could be over 65, youth, Medicaid, or disabled. And our public meetings revealed that these groups are requesting reduced fares. If we were to offer discounts, again, we would need a system to prove eligibility for discounts. And so with respect to the tight timeline and limited budget, bus operators would use rider ID cards as proof of discount eligibility. And lastly, with our stakeholder interests, we want to satisfy our state legislator concerns for future funding eligibility. So our representatives have told us time and time again that it's highly recommended that we charge fares if we want to pursue funding in the future. So we come up with three options, fare options. Option one is $1 per ride, no discounts. Option two, $1 regular fare per ride, 50-cent discount per ride. Or option three is no fare. The reason why we came up with that $1 is because, again, the fares double as you go through those transfer points through Skagit, which would drive it up to $2 for the rider or $4 round trip, which is standard for the region pretty much. So option one, same for all riders, $1 regular fare for all rides. Under option one, with those same assumptions, 411W and 411C cost per trip is about 5 cents per mile. And again, compared to the cost of fuel, about 13 cents a mile. And what the IRS says is standard, it's still a pretty good deal to ride on the bus. Under option one, 411W and 411C, we looked at our estimated ridership for 13 runs on 411W and our estimated fare revenue, looking at the cost of what it is to perform that service for 13 runs, we come with a fare cost recovery about 6.2%. Under 411C, there are 9 runs, estimated ridership about 15,000. Our fare revenue at $1 per ride, again about $15,000. Total estimated expense of performing those 9 runs, about $500,000, and fare recovery ratio 3%. And it should be noted that fare recovery ratio is not required currently for 411-4WC funding. Our first year startup costs are a little bit higher than at Camano, and we estimated it to be about $20,000. So the financial impact of if we were to charge fares, once again, we're showing 1 year's revenue and 1 year of collecting fares on both 411W and C if we were to charge just a straight $1 for all rides. Of course, state fare reimbursement rules means that we would have to reduce our reimbursement by whatever we collected, so the fares would have no impact to us. But we would still be paying the fare startup cost, about $20,000, so we would end up with $1,129,720. Option 2, 411 fare with discounts, we would be charged, the proposal for option 2 would be $1 regular fare per ride and 50 cents discounted fare for the groups identified, which would be similar, or it's the same model that Skagit's using. For over 65 youth, college, Medicaid recipients, disabled, and then free for anyone under age 8. Our demographics are a little bit different, and this is how it would look if we applied 50 cents for the discounted riders and $1 for our regular riders for both 411W and 411C. Our cost per mile, regular riders again is around 5 cents per mile, where if it's discounted, it would be half of that. And again, it would compare to the cost of driving your own private autos, about 13 cents a mile. So still a pretty good deal for bus riders. We're also we're trying to accommodate trans-dependent riders. So a 50-cent discounted fare along with 50-cent discounted fare with Skagit would be $1 one way or $2 round trip between Island County and all points Skagit County. And so that we still consider that to be affordable. Under option 2, when we look at 411W, 411C, and we figure the estimated ridership, we see a fare recovery ratio of 4.93 on 411W, and for 411C, 2.34. Again, fare recovery ratio goals are not required currently for funding of 411W and 411C. But we can see that it is lower than our 412. First year startup costs, still for option 2, same as option 1, about $20,000. Here on, and this would be for startup costs on Whidbey Island, this location. And for option 2, the financial impact, as you can see, the impact is no difference than option 1 to us. We'd be collecting less revenue, but again, we would have to reduce our reimbursements from the state for whatever we collect. We wouldn't have to pay out for fair startup costs, so we can end up with a net of $1,129,720. So we'll move on to option 3, same fare for all riders. No change from the current fare policy, fare free. Under option 3, fare free service obviously is popular with the public. There's no startup costs, or fare free service would perhaps jeopardize our state funding starting July of 2017. Financial impact, we wouldn't be collecting any fares or deducting, and we wouldn't have fare startup costs, so we would end up a little higher net here in the short run, 1150. So in the short run, this would be the most advantageous in terms of financial impact to Iowa Transit. So we come to the summary of fare options. Options 1, 2, and 3, we have $1 per ride, no discounts. Option 2, $1 ride, 50-cent discount. Option 3, no fare. Financial impact in 1 and 2 is the same, $1,129,720. That's the difference in fare recovery ratios, 6.2, 3.0 on option 1, or 4.93, 2.34 on option 2. Under option 3 with no fare, financial impact, a little more beneficial to our agency with the possible loss of state funding in 2017. So which brings us full circle to our decision point. Should we charge a fare on 411? And if so, determine the rate.
Again, Executive Director's recommendation along with staff's review and recommendation. The recommendation is to not implement fares at this time on routes 411W and 411C. Current 411 operations are fully funded by the state at this time through June 30th, so there's no financial burden on us at this point. Neither fare collection nor specific fare box recovery goal is required for continued operation of 411, thereby reducing the urgency to implement 411 fares at this point in conjunction with Route 412. Route 412, again, a totally separate animal. Inter-county policy issues and rider demographic information for both 411W and 411C routes require greater review, including actual operating data and ridership information gained from what we can pull from information related to the implementation of Route 412. Agency efforts for now should focus on 412 implementation and monitoring to ensure customer satisfaction of that service and operational success. Implementation of 411W and 411C fares should be a standalone element in IT's system-wide fare implementation plan. I think implementing fares at this point on 411W and 411C would detract from our efforts to do a superior job on doing what we can for 412 and making that a success. Additionally, though, I would recommend that a fare plan be produced and approved by the board prior to or in conjunction with state legislature. When you go to the state legislature in January, that there be a solid recommendation in terms of how we would charge fares, and whether it's for these routes or even extended beyond these routes. But I think to go to the legislature this time around is going to require a strong plan moving forward. And I think we need that time now to get that together prior to January. That concludes our presentation.
This time we'll start our discussion, questions with Lance, and we'll move from my left to the right.
Thank you. I don't have any questions, but to be right up front, I If I had a vote, I would select option 2. I think it's inevitable that the fare that we've come up with, the $1 regular and the 50-cent discounted, it's going to probably happen in 2017. I don't see I think the implementation of a reasonable fare here, since close to 50% of the ridership would be entitled to that discount. I know you say 40%, but and you could be accurate on that, but I do really favor to get it done now. Thank you.
Thank you, Lance. Bruce?
I think I would go with 2 myself. And I'm not too sure whether I'd do it now, but wait till the legislature starts dealing with it. Like Brian said, it's inevitable at some point. I don't know, is it going to slow us down on 412? It's not, so why not do it now?
Finish. Can you put 2 back up on the board there, please, since discussion?
Keep the light off.
Jackie?
I think I favor option 3 at this point. I would really like us to firm up those numbers a little more of who would get a discount. There's a couple of things I worry about under the disabled portion of how you determine that, because not all people who are disabled are on Medicaid, and so, and just because you're disabled, it doesn't mean you have a card that says you're disabled. That's a real gray area and could be very intrusive on people. And I think we have to figure out how the driver is going to be determining, how we're going to determine all of those discounts. It just seems very cumbersome at this point. I guess I would like to see us look at people applying for one card that says they're entitled to a fare, and they go through some kind of process that gives them that one card, because I don't see how a driver can sometimes look at a driver's license, sometimes look at a college ID, sometimes look at a Medicaid card. And I can tell you a lot of people on Medicaid do not carry their cards because it's very dangerous if they're stolen, so they like remember their number. I would just like to smooth it out a little more, so right now my option would be 3.
Ms. Johnson?
I prefer option 3 primarily because option 2 is no longer an option because of the decision we made on the 412. We had legal advice last time that clearly explained to us that we couldn't offer reduced fares on one route that we didn't offer on another. When we made the decision on the 412 to not have reduced fares for certain populations, we made the decision on the 411 to not have reduced fares for certain populations. So we're really choosing between options 1 and 3. I'm in favor of option 3 because of some of the concerns that were expressed. I think we have a different commuter population on that route that we need to look at in terms of understanding what their needs are. I think that if we get to the point of making a motion, I think I would recommend a motion that suggested that we implement the fares at the time of route renewal or route expansion of the legislature so that they know we have a fare policy in place once that route is renewed. I think that gives us some talking points and some leverage over the future of that. And then the other thing that this clearly outlined was that implementing the fares right now is a revenue loss for the organization. Mind you, it's a gain for the state. So from a taxpayer standpoint, it does have some positive impact, but for this agency standpoint, it doesn't have a financial positive impact. And I think that we need to communicate that a little bit better to the legislatures, and we're not in a position financially to take even a $20,000 hit. So I'm going to go option 3 with a proposed recommendation that we get ourselves positioned to implement fares at the time the legislature reviews the routes.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what Ken has said. At this time, first and foremost, I want to thank Ken and his staff for this. Obviously took some work putting all this together. Your recommendation, Ken, I concur with wholeheartedly that we hold off on implementing fares on the 411 and use the 412 for our test bed. It gives us a chance to see how the collecting of the fares goes, how it affects ridership. It gives, instead of using statistics that have come from other agencies and whatnot, we'll see right here what is happening in Island Transit. And at that point, then when it comes time, you know, for us to be doing our review and we're looking at if we are or are not going to get any continued state funding, and then at that point we can look, like you say, come up with policies and plans and have an implementation plan. Say, yes, okay, now we can do this. It's got, you know, may come to the point where we decide we want to do just an executive or a commuter run straight through an express where we cut out Skagit. However, there's a lot of options there. So at this time, I'm going to support your recommendation, which is to take option 3.
Thank you, Rick. Well, I concur with the option 3 proposal also in the discussion, and particularly having a fair plan prior to legislative action so that we have a policy in place that establishes where we're going subject to funding. Because we all have to look at this as, this is what I've heard from the legislator, if we're not helping ourselves, don't expect any help from them. We heard that from the DOT representatives also. When, I think his name's Matt, young guy who came in here several times. Ryan, excuse me. So it really can come down to no fares, no service on the 411s. And that would not be good for us. And so I'm going to support the discussion, and I'll wait for the motion by, I think Jill probably articulated it best, but I want to be on record that I support a system-wide fare policy where even we may restructure, as Rick Hanold said, taking a look at expresses up and down the spine of this country, so county, so that we can improve the delivery time and the service, even if that means just stopping and picking up at our park and ride locations. But that's for a future discussion. So I'll entertain a motion at this time on this topic. And
I move to establish a fare collection policy for routes 411W and 411C to be implemented at the time of route renewal or route expansion by the legislature.
okay, the motion has been made to establish,
A fare collection policy for routes 411W and 411C to be implemented at the time of route renewal or route expansion by the legislature. And if I could clarify, the reason I included route expansion was that this board may have a policy that has different fares proposed or adopted depending upon if the legislature approves a route all the way into Mount Vernon, or if the legislature approves a route just to collect to March's point. It allows us to present 2 fare options based on what their recommendation, or what their funding approval might be.
okay. So there has
Should
been,
you add in the motion, though, that there be fare free until that point?
Well, we're fare free now.
uh,
So what I thought this said was that we were establishing a fare collection policy that would not be implemented until the time of a route renewal.
And maintain the current status quo until that point.
Okay.
all right.
And I'm maintaining the status quo until that point.
Get that, Meg?
Meg, I'm going to have you read it back on the record.
I move to establish a fare collection policy for routes 411W and 411C to be implemented at time of route renewal or route expansion by the state legislature, and to maintain the status quo until that time.
Okay. All right, there's the motion. We have a second from Ms. Henderson. Any further discussion on this? I don't need to say anymore. I was going to add some comment to this, but it's not necessary. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried unanimously. So the 411W and the 411C remain fare-free at this time. This also, this is what I was going to say, we need a little leverage to communicate and negotiate with our adjoining transit districts too. And I think this gives us that flexibility to work with our legislators. We're going to need some push on their part because it is really not equitable to the citizens of this community to be serving into Skagit County and into Snohomish County at our expense, at their expense. Okay, that is the items on here. I have a question for you, Ken. We do not have on our agenda an executive session. I wanted to talk to you, council, and to Ken and the board about the transition gap between Mr. Nortier and Ken. And there's going to be a gap in there. We don't have a board meeting at that time to make any kind of decision, and we won't make a decision in executive session. We'll come back. Can we do that right now?
Yeah, you just can't take action on anything.
Right, but we can go into executive session. So we'll step out for, I'm going to say 15 minutes and discuss this in that.
Is the training room?
We have to stay here.
You have to stay here. The other room is.
Oh, okay, we'll stay here.
So we'll leave.
So we'll have to ask our guests to step out for 15 minutes if they would, please.
It's the qualifications further.
The qualifications.
Yeah, just the second, review public.
15 minutes.
15 minutes.
I got the timer.
You got that?
Forgot my phone to feel naked.
I have my phone. I have been without it though for 2 weeks.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah. Well, since it was the 5th or 6th, actually, the last thing I got to check off with my credit card to go and get some stuff in the store. And I saw her the next day. She would have been arrested again. And the truck was kept in impound. The truck was impounded and kept his evidence. I was like, what the fuck? But so my credit card was in there, so I had to call and cancel it, and they still haven't sent me a new one. So, so she's in treatment now. And she called and she had to leave me these voicemails, but I can't get them on my phone, but I get emails.
Oh, okay.
I do the speech to text.
Yeah.
So you don't have to understand it when you're reading it. That's kind of fun, next thing. And, but I think she's like, hey, Mom, I'm in treatment. So I guess she got arrested. She had already been given open jail. You know? And she had a bullet on her heart. We did her snap with it. So I talked to her last night twice, and she sounds so good.
Okay.
So I guess she'll graduate from there. 28 or something like that. She's like, will you please continue with graduation? I said, yeah, I'll come visit you ahead of time, so I'm going to make some phone calls or write a letter.